This story is set in Saudi Arabia. I arrived in Saudi Arabia 3 years ago and initially had a job. However, I am now jobless and living in a rented room in the desert. There is a factory some distance away from my room and an abandoned house on the other side. Other than these two structures, there is nothing around, making the area look quite eerie at night. Since I shifted to this room, I have been having a recurring nightmare every night. I dream of a ghostly figure attacking me, and I wake up suddenly heart racing. I told my mom about these dreams, and she advised me to read the holy book and perform holy rituals to protect myself. I followed her advice diligently, but nothing seemed to work. I found myself unable to sleep, and my body shivered at every little noise coming from outside. Then the paranormal activities began. One night, at 11 p.m., after having dinner, I returned to my room and closed the door behind me. Suddenly, someone knocked on my door. Thinking it might be a laborer from the factory, I opened it, only to find no one there. The outside environment was eerily quiet and dark, sending chills down my spine. I quickly closed the door again and tried to calm myself, rationalizing that maybe someone was just trying to tease me. But then another thought struck me: the factory closes at 8 p.m. Then how it can be a laborer? A few days later, another incident occurred. I had a large opening on one side of my room, which I had covered with a thick sheet to protect against mosquitoes and sandstorms. I had tied it so firmly that I believed even a storm couldn't untie it. Yet, one night the sheet fell down on its own. I thought maybe there was a thief trying to get in, but I looked everywhere and there was no one. I had a window in my bathroom that opened toward the factory, but I never opened it myself. One night I found that the window was wide open. I closed it, but fear gripped me. Due to my disturbed sleeping routine, I often found myself awake at odd hours. One night, around 3 a.m., I went into the bathroom and saw that window open again. This time I noticed an intense light coming from outside, shining out of the window, and disappeared. I was breathless. It couldn't have been a delusion, since the factory was closed at that hour. I screamed loudly, but then tried to calm myself. That night, I anxiously waited for morning to come. I called a friend and asked him to stay on the line because I was scared. When the sun rose, I cut the call and finally fell asleep. After that incident, the paranormal activities escalated. Items in my room began to fall on their own: a water bottle, my hairbrush, and my toothbrush. Surprisingly, I started to get used to it. 4 months passed, and while I had grown accustomed to the paranormal occurrences, my nightmares shifted. In one dream, I saw a man wrapped in a shroud who held my hand and pleaded, "Save me, please save me." Just think for a moment: a person living alone in the desert, experiencing paranormal activities and frightening dreams. It was a truly terrible situation. The first time I had that dream, I was so scared I couldn't move. I tried to call my friend, but he was asleep. I recited verses from our holy book loudly to calm myself. The man I saw in my dream was terrifying. His face was like fire. His eyes were missing, and he wore a creepy smile. I grew afraid of sleeping because I didn't want to see that dream again. But every time I fell asleep, the same man returned, pleading for help. I felt trapped in that house because I had already paid for it and didn't have enough money to move elsewhere. My only hope was to go to Europe, but my visa was taking too long. One night at 12 a.m., I felt something behind me at the headrest of my bed. I turned to look and saw the same figure from my dreams. I was paralyzed with fear. He was sitting on the headrest of my bed. I jumped out of bed and bolted out of my room, leaving my phone behind. Outside, the environment was pitch dark: no lights, no vehicles, no humans. I stayed outside for 2 hours, terrified to return for my phone. Finally, at 2 a.m., I mustered the courage to go back inside. I grabbed my phone and called my friend, recounting the entire incident. He was frightened too, and advised me to see a religious scholar as soon as possible. My uncle, a religious scholar, lived 120 kilometers away from me. I called him and explained my situation and the nightmares I had been experiencing. He told me to sit on the ground and then said, "Trust me." He recited verses from the Holy Book, and I fainted. When I came to, my uncle instructed me to call the police. They arrived shortly after. Regarding that open area in my room, my uncle asked the police to dig there. I was confused and asked why. They said they would explain later. We gathered all the necessary tools for digging, and when we started, we discovered a dead body buried there. My uncle had a feeling that someone had been murdered and buried in that spot after hearing about my dream. The ghost of that dead body had been trying to communicate with me. It was a horrifying experience. I later learned that the previous owner of the house was a bad person. He had warned me not to go near that open area, saying it wasn't mine and I should never use it. The police investigated for a month, coming by daily. The owner of the factory and my home had disappeared. As for my fainting spell, I believe I had been possessed by the spirit residing in that house, trying to tell me about the dead body. He was Arabic and had communicated with my uncle, indicating where to dig. After that ordeal, I left the house and now share an apartment with my uncle.